Heyo, and welcome back to Chapter Chumps, a reading podcast in which three guys read a book and then talk about it. Three regular guys, dudes, if you will. This podcast does not have the dude moniker, but if you're familiar with our output, then you'll know that a lot of times we refer to ourselves as dudes, three regular dudes. As ever, I am your host. My name is Connor. I am joined, as ever, by my two co-hosts, Connor and Josh. Today on the podcast, we are going to be discussing chapters 5 through 8 of H.G. Wells's The Time Machine. And let me tell you, there's a lot to talk about. So buckle up, strap in, break off a lever of some dilapidated museum exhibit, and come along for the ride as we discuss those chapters. Boys, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm good. Honestly, I'm a little more, I don't know if you can tell or not. I don't want to give the game away like 2 minutes into the podcast. I'm actually a little more drunk than usual.
He's feeling no pain tonight.
Well, we're starting an hour later than we're supposed to, so.
I clocked that the second he started talking to me tonight.
Oh, okay. I said one slightly critical thing to you, and your takeaway must be like,
no,
it wasn't.
It wasn't really. It wasn't really critical. It's just the way. It's just the way.
Oh.
It's just the way you were act. You're my best friend of so many years. I know these things.
Right. You know how it is.
Pretty,
you're like, oh
pretty
boy.
Short,
Oh boy.
Yeah. Anyways, I was thinking when you were introducing the book and the podcast and everything, I was thinking H.G. Wells. In these chapters, Wells play a part. The Wells play a part in the chapters we're going to be discussing. I was wondering maybe if his own name gave him some inspiration there.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. And then like you think about HG, history gastronomer. He's gastronomying history.
Yep. But then also, it also makes you think of HGTV.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Wow, it's too bad he didn't live to see HGTV because he would have had a field day.
He would have, yeah. I mean, he would have thought it was a product of communism.
I think most things he would have thought was a product of almost anything that's different from 1895. He would have been like, this must be communism, right?
I guess if we're just thinking that the time traveler is just a stand-in of H.G. Wells, which I think it is, probably.
A little bit, yeah. A little bit. I do have some stuff to say about that. Hopefully my notes reflect that as we kind of get that. But I agree. I do think that the opinions of the time traveler are meant to like largely reflect the opinions of the author. Yeah, I think that's fair. It feels that way.
And we'll get into it obviously too, because he's not such a rigid character where he thinks he's always right, not stubbornly always right, very much a scientist's mind where he's like, oh, okay, well this, he changes his when he discovers new facts, he changes his thoughts and his hypotheses, which is, as any good scientist would do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Although he is very quick to like immediately believe it's his first hypothesis.
Yes,
like,
absolutely.
Which is also
which
kind
a man
funny.
Of a studied man of the 19th century would do.
Yeah, right. It's like, why not?
Yeah.
I think I highlighted some parts later in the reading we did that basically was like, I immediately assumed
Right.
it's like yeah,
Yeah.
you've been doing that all book.
Yeah, we get a couple instances of that. Josh, when did you read these chapters?
Yesterday.
Yesterday. Do you feel like you're kind of learning from the constant schedule changes and last minute like last minute, oh shit, sorry about that for me and Connor? Is that why? Or
Partially, and also just on the other hand side of things, like reading on Sunday, kind of me, regardless of when we do it in the week, just makes it harder to remember because a lot happens at work and throughout the week. So
right. Right. Okay. And how has it been reading on your Kindle? Do you feel like is there anything noteworthy about the Kindle experience?
Do you call it
um
Kindle Jenner?
no,
Okay.
Because you could,
You
I
could.
don't.
if you
All
wanted.
right.
I don't.
Okay. Gotcha.
Um, no, there's nothing really unusual from the Kindle side of things, except for some reason the file that I have, um, the words that are supposed to be in italics are instead normal text with underscores on either side of the word. I don't know why, but that's just how it seems to be formatted in my Kindle for some reason. So I don't know what could have caused that.
I see. I see. Yeah, it could be a weird, like a typeface issue. I don't know.
Yeah, couldn't tell you.
Connor, did you read these chapters today like I did? Because I read them a mere. I finished reading them at about 3:30 today is when I finished up. What about you?
Yeah. I woke up today at around 5,
Yeah.
and I can't just jump right into reading after I wake up.
No,
That's fucking insane. So I
that'd
of
be
course
stupid.
had a cup of coffee and listened to an album. And then I
Oh,
got
oh,
to
oh, were you listening to Turnstile? Never Enough?
that's my go-to, but I didn't have enough time for that. I knew if I
Oh,
listened to
okay.
all of that album that I wouldn't be able to finish the chapters. So
So what'd
I
you listen
listened
to?
to the album Ripe by Pretty Rude, which is a great
Oh,
kind of power pop rock and roll record that came out
that's
last month.
cool. That's a new one for me. Cool to hear
Yeah,
you share it.
you would like it. You would like it. And so I actually finished reading a little bit after 7. So because Connor, you were like, let's push it back to 7:30.
Yeah.
If you didn't text that, I would have texted that probably 10 minutes later
Yeah.
or less than that
Yeah.
because I was already on that trajectory.
Yeah, I'm happy to help you out, man. The reason I had to push it back, today was so I'm a fifth grade elementary school teacher, and today was the fifth grade graduation for my class,
Oh, congrats.
which actually ended very early.
Congratulations.
Thank you both, thank you both. But then afterwards, a lot of the staff from my school was like, "Hey, we're doing a celebration. Let's go out bowling and celebrate." This was already pre-planned. Like this wasn't a surprise. I
Yeah.
knew this, and so I was like, "Yeah, totally."
Surprise bowling.
And it was supposed to end at 6, so I was like, "Oh, I'll definitely be back for 7, no problem." But it's like things kind of like rolled over a little bit. And I was like,
Yep.
"Oh boy, I'm gonna need so that's why I need a little bit more time, and that's also why I'm just slightly a little bit like just like
Extra.
a little bit. It's like obviously I came home responsibly. Like I'm
You're a
not
little
some sick
toasty.
fuck, um, but I had a head start, is all I'm saying. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
this is the explanation through the fourth dimension of the chronology of my evening to get us to here. You see what I mean? Yeah.
Well, I'm
So here
glad
we
you
are.
found. I'm glad you were able to find your time machine. Your time machine. Make it home.
Yes. Yeah.
My
Absolutely.
mic is fine.
Oh yeah,
Sure
no,
it is.
absolutely. I like, you just have to give it a little tap, a little
Tip
like, hey,
tap,
you still
tippity
working there,
tap tap.
buddy?
Yeah,
Um,
we're not done just yet.
no. I'm just waiting for the time that it gives out like mid podcast, just like truly
Yeah, and
doesn't
then
work
it's just done.
anymore.
It
Yeah,
just
then
yeah.
yep. And then what do we do? Like, but not yet.
I just mouth the words, and you have to, speak for the both of us. You just have to read
That's
my
right.
lips.
No, me and Josh are gonna go full HAL 9000 and just
Yeah,
and read your every word. We're gonna know exactly what you're saying.
that
Yeah.
works.
So hey, well, we're starting a little bit later, so after all that, why don't we jump into it? We're going to be discussing chapters 5
Through
through
8.
8. Yes, through
And
8.
5 is a doozy. So we'll probably be done with talking about chapter 5 in
an
by
hour.
about 9:30.
Yeah, right. I was thinking the same thing. This is sort of like how like last episode 2, like the first chapter we spent a whole bunch of time on, and then the last we kind of cruised through. I think you're right, Josh. This will probably be similar. This was a longer chapter. I'm going to give my best summation of this chapter here. And, essentially it starts where the time traveler, he is exploring up on the hill from the previous chapter. And then like he kind of gets this sinking feeling and he realizes like, oh, well, he's like looking at the field where he left the time machine and he realizes he doesn't see it there. And he gets into like 70% panic mode, 30% like, hey, maybe this is going to be fine. And then like as he's sprinting down the hill, it's like panic mode increases. He's like, no,
105% panic mode.
right. This deal is getting worse all the time.
I've altered the terms of the deal.
Yeah. So when he makes it down there and he realizes for sure the time machine is truly not where he left it, he kind of goes into this this state of like he like gives into his base instincts. It's like he's only reacting like through emotion and sheer, I guess we already used the word, but panic. And there's several stages to that. He goes into the palaces where the little people are sleeping and they're all freaked out, and he's like, what the fuck's happening? And he's like, you know like in a real state of like kind of like temporary insanity. And he falls asleep, he wakes back up, he's like, hey, well, the morning I have a bit more temperance. And he like kind of works to try to break open the Sphinx statue to no avail. He tries to get the little people to give him any sense of direction, but they're like very much afraid to approach the base of the Sphinx statue, and they think that he's very weird for trying to interact with it. And what else? And what else?
And he meets Weena.
Is that this chapter? It's not the
Yep.
next. It is this chapter. Thank you, Josh. Okay. And we
also
yeah, go on.
This chapter. Sorry, I was gonna say we also learn the name of the little people and some other creatures that have been roaming around.
Yes. How would you say those creatures and this people's names, Josh?
I would pronounce them as Morlocks for the other creatures, and the little people as Eloy or Eloy.
Is that all in the first chapter?
That's all in chapter 5. I'm looking at my notes right now.
It is actually. I'm just looking at it too. It's like the last 2 pages. They talk about the names as well.
Yep.
You know what I will say?
this chapter has a lot of creeping of revealing the Morlocks.
Yes.
That's why it takes so long.
My pronunciation of this, I have talked about how I was first exposed to this and first read this book in my high school sci-fi lit class. And I think that's where my pronunciation of these people comes from, because I don't think I would say it this way naturally, but my teacher, shout out to Mr. Clenny, I'm very, very sure said it this way, and so I'm predisposed to say it this way. I would say the Eloi. The Eloi. Instead of the Eloy.
That's what bothers me is I feel like at the end, seeing an I at the end of the word, to me, feels like it should make an E sound.
Yeah.
Kind of like martini or I don't know why that's the word that came to mind and nothing else.
Well, we know you love your martinis.
It's true. Josh is probably
honestly the next word that came to mind. The next word that came to mind was actually disproves my entire point, and it's Gemini, because you don't say Gemini.
You say Gemini, I say Gemini. I always, well, reading it, I would think of it as Eloy, which feels wrong, which does feel like a name or something of like a person, but it's definitely not correct. But that's just how I process it.
I mean, we all could just say our own thing and then see if we just naturally eventually land on a common pronunciation.
Well, that's usually what happens with these things, like with Benny Gesserit and other names from going back to Dune Dudes, talking about the Dude verse that we've created for ourselves. The names just kind of eventually we kind of land on some common ground.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. Well, yeah, no, this chapter ends. Josh had mentioned too, like the time traveler meets Weena, who is a member.
Until I read her name. Sorry, up until I read her name, I could have sworn it was Lena.
Yeah, it's definitely a W there. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why I was remembering it as Lena, but I came across it as
you probably just didn't want to remember the name Weena. You probably just I mean,
you know what it probably was? I probably just got mixed up with Leela.
Maybe.
Yeah. Honestly, as I was reading this chapter and the subsequent chapters, I feel like there's a couple things I maybe don't want to remember about Weena.
Yeah, it got a little weird.
I don't know exactly where this is. It's not that like what happens in these chapters is like explicitly completely like out of pocket, but there's definitely some uncomfortable moments or some moments that kind of make you kind of like question like what is the nature of their relationship and what is going on here exactly.
Absolutely. And I don't know. I was like dreading seeing how far he was going to take it with Weena. And I guess we still don't really know, but it's questionable.
Very much so, yeah. I am choosing to see it as kind of like a parent-child relationship for now, unless things really go off the deep end. Hoping they don't, because I don't remember. But based on what I remember of the story, things don't end well. So
okay, so the one thing I want to say about that, and this jumps ahead. I don't think this is mentioned in this chat. Might be actually, but there is a mention of lovemaking, but between the Eloy, playful lovemaking, and to me, I read that, and then I was clocking his relationship with Weena, and I was like, oh, I don't. If this is going where I think it's going, I don't feel good about this.
Yeah.
She is very childlike in her depiction throughout the entire story, and the Eloy, fuck, they definitely have childlike tendencies all over, and their language in particular is incredibly simplistic. We find out,
It's like Teletubbies.
Pretty much.
Oh no!
That's actually a great way of putting it.
Oh no! No, I mean it's a great way of putting it, but then like you start thinking about fucking Popo, and it's like
Yeah, that's
it's
no good.
not.
That's no good.
Popo's from
it's
Dragon
not
Ball.
No, come on. There's a Popo, isn't there?
No, it's just Po.
It's just Po?
Yep.
You're telling me there's Lala, Tinky Winky,
Ditzy?
and then a couple of, and it's just Po? It's not Popo?
Yep. It's just Po.
It's and the red one. Po.
All right, well, you know, the point is I don't really want to like get stuck on like the whole idea of like everyone thinking about like you know, but you know, it's like some analogies work better than others. That's all, you know.
So the other thing I wanted to mention about this first chapter, just quick, you know, because you did your rundown and obviously about how, you know, he comes and he finds the time machine is gone, has been moved somewhere, and obviously he freaks the fuck out. When we see him come back from his adventure to retell his tale to all of his gentlemen that he hosts, he's all disheveled, all bloodied up, all in tattered clothing, looks like shit. And so I imagined like, oh, maybe he comes from this epic battle where he has been, you know, he fought valiantly, or I don't know, something crazy happened. And so then I read this and like, oh, he just like fucking fell down a bunch of
tripped down a hill.
He tripped down a hill and got tumbled around some bushes and got all fucking thorned up and so I mean, obviously more has happened and could happen to him, but in that moment I was like, so he just fucking fell, like
right, because they talk about the cut on his
exactly
face there
yeah
too, right? Yeah,
he got a cut on his face, yeah. So that I was like, oh, okay, well I guess that's it, but obviously there could be more.
Yeah. Oh man. I think we'll have to cut. Well, I think we'll circle back to the whole Weena thing because I think I have some notes on that later, and I don't really want to front load the entire conversation with like this is what I think about the time traveler's relationship with this 4 foot tall child baby. Like, you know,
that though also the name Weena doesn't help those connotations.
Okay, so we are gonna just talk.
I was saying before you jump off of that tangent, you know, I'm just saying the name doesn't help.
It certainly does not.
You think if her name was like Wamantha, you'd be like, oh, okay, like
that's a bit better, yeah.
Yeah, you'd be like, oh, okay, yeah.
I'd be like, oh yeah, nothing wrong here. It's totally normal. Totally normal relationship.
Well, you know, I do think there's kind of an idea, like the thing that's not clear, and it's like one of those like I do and I don't want the specifics, but it's like we don't have any information on Weena's age. Because we talk, like, the time traveler describes the Eloi as very, like, childlike and whimsical. But, like, we don't have, like, any kind of broad understanding of their lifespan, of, like, their maturation process, you know, like, all of these other things that feel like they would be relevant if we were discussing like humanical consent, let's call it, you know.
We're not sure if they passed the Harkness test.
I get why in 1895, because again, like we have to remind ourselves this book was written in 1895.
That's 130 years ago.
That's absolutely worth mentioning in this context. And it's not to be like, oh, well, don't think about it. Don't worry about it. But it's like, you know, you do kind of have to give people slack. I mean, like, that's going to be a really generous, broad term. But I mean, like, I do think there's something about approaching a work in good faith in the context in which it was written versus trying to approach it and trying to like appropriate it and apply it into like the modern age. Because if you were to take the time traveler at face fucking value and try to work it into like the modern moral context of 2025, you would eviscerate this fucking book. There would be nothing left. And yet I do think that there's value in reading something like this, specifically because of how long ago it was written. Like it really does give you like talking about time traveling, it really does give you a glimpse into the perspective of, you know, what it was like to be alive in 1895. And not only that, but like what was their vision of the future, you know, during that time, and how close or far away from the mark, you know, might they be? Like we have no idea. We're not in 800,000 AD, but you know, it's really fascinating to consider not only the life of a person from that time period, but like what did they consider to be the future in 1895? I think that's one of the most interesting parts of reading this story. And so, not to get jumbled up in my own thoughts or my own words here, but it's like I think reading through the time machine, it's this kind of like constant sort of like act and reflection on like, oh, you know, boy, there's some things here that like really don't track anymore, versus, oh wow, this is like a really interesting look into the mind of a person at this time. And I think like it's sort of like our onus as readers in the modern day, you know. I think it's just as close-minded to look at a work like The Time Machine and to be like, oh well, you know, this is fucking gross and uncomfortable and stupid, so there must be nothing to it because it doesn't perfectly adhere to like, you know, the modern day values that, you know, we consider to be correct, you know. And I think that this is a really good exercise in kind of like walking through the minefield of like art analysis and just recognizing that yes, and just recognizing that like there's going to be parts that are worthwhile to consider, and there's going to be parts that are worthwhile to examine and be like, maybe this is fucked up, and that just all comes with the act of reading, you know, something from a different time. Maybe I'll just leave it at that and see where our discussion takes us. But that's kind of how I feel about it, like broadly, you know.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, boy. So, and this chapter kind of ends just very quickly. We talked about how Josh was like, yeah, no, Weena's in this chapter, the Eloi and the more, like all of this is in this chapter. This chapter ends with the time traveler, like kind of like trying to coax and get more information out of Weena. And like, he's like, what about the wells? Connor was talking about H.G. Wells, right? Like, what about the, and it like disturbs her so much that the chapter ends. He has to like comfort her with lighting a match. And that kind of becomes more relevant as we read through these chapters. That's sort of where this ends. Connor, I already did a whole bunch of rambling. Is there anything about this first chapter that you want to share or discuss, just in general?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a lot going on. The first chapter in particular kind of feels like it is like a little blurred to me now, just after reading all four in quick succession. But I don't know. I like kind of delving into this world a little bit more. actually the very first like paragraph or two of the chapter, I was like, because he was talking about his like new friends or whatever, and then, like at first I was like, oh, is he talking about the people he's retelling the story to in his living room or in his study? And I was like, that's a weird way to describe them as childish. And I was like, oh wait, no, he's in the fucking future. He's not talking about the men of the 1800s. So that was kind of funny. And I I think immediately goes back to this guy being like, "Oh yeah, this is the inevitable conclusion of communism. This is
Yeah.
it." And obviously, as we go on through these chapters, his interpretation of how we get to this point does change, and he always kind of uh qualifies it with, oh, I thought that, but I guess but I ended up being wrong. But it is just funny how consistently he brings that up. And uh I mean, I think it's a decent, like, it's decent character writing where he is kind of presumptive and um definitely fancies himself a man of intelligence and knowledge. And but he's still quick to make assumptions. And I think that's turning into a bit of an issue for him, and his pursuit in trying to get his machine back and get his way home. The other things like notable about the chapter was how quick, because again, it's funny how in the previous chapters he made multiple notes of like savages of old and how we've evolved past this, our base level as human beings, and we've become civilized and whatever. um and just how quick to aggression he is with these people when he is frightened, you know and like how primalistic, animalistic that reaction is. Now that's natural, of course, but like it's just funny, like the dichotomy there. How he turns to aggression pretty fast, and to these people that's pretty foreign to them. At first they don't even know how to handle it. They're like laughing and then they get scared, but it takes a while for them to get there. So I just found that interesting, like I think it seems to be somewhat intentional in the writing here. Just that this man who we see as a man of high society and uh etiquette, in certain situations we revert to that savage form that he seems so confident that he's evolved above.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I just want to add before I get to Josh's thoughts here. Like, I noticed that too. And I took that as Wells's sort of commentary on on how adults treated and raised children at the time, because of like how uh like the time traveler kind of comes back over and over to like this sort of idea of the Eloi being childlike, or like having these qualities or tendencies that he would associate with children, even if they might be fully grown themselves. And so I kind of took it as like, oh yeah, like even this guy who's like a well-learned man of science, if he was in a position of like child rearing, I think they would just like fucking slap the shit out of this kid who's like not obey. And I think that like he's kind of just carrying over his 19th century child uh raising habits. And I think because of the time when it's written, like I think it's done like mostly uncritically. I didn't really feel like Wells is trying to be like, oh, should we or shouldn't we be doing this? But I sort of took it as like, this is how adults typically treat children in 1895. And if you're
Yeah.
not listening and if you're not obeying, then you're gonna get fucking smacked upside the head,
You stole my car keys, you little shit.
Yeah. At least that's what I mean. Hey, I could be way off base too here. I'm a future reader from 2025. I might be way off base, but that's how
No,
I
that
felt
makes sense
about
too. Yeah.
it. Josh, what did you make of this chapter? Is there anything you want to zero in on here?
I think you guys covered the main themes pretty extensively, but I do have a lot of notes, so I'm thinking I might just lightning
Let's
round through them
let's do that. I
for
have
this
notes as
chapter.
well. Let's see if our notes line up at all. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, first note for me, I'm just going to use my page numbers that showed up in the Kindle. Page 35. It's the very beginning of the chapter. He refers to the full moon, yellow and gibbous. I highlighted that because it immediately stood out to me. A gibbous moon is not a full moon. A gibbous moon is between the first quarter and the full moon.
Right.
So that was a bit of a contradiction there. Next up, page 36. The attachment of the levers.
Whoa, wait. What's contradictory about that? That's just a phase of the moon.
Right, but it's not the full moon. The full moon is a separate phase from the gibbous moon.
I know it is. So what's the contradiction? He's just describing the phase of the moon.
The full moon, yellow and gibbous. He's saying the full moon is gibbous, but the full moon is not gibbous. The full moon is full.
Oh, I'm sorry. That is specifically what the line says. The full moon, yellow and gibbous.
Yes.
Oh, I misunderstood. Yeah, I didn't think about that at all. I see what you mean, Josh. Yeah.
All right. Page 36. The attachment of the levers, I will show you the method later, prevented anyone from tampering with it in that way when they were moved. That way meaning like someone could take the machine and fly off with it. I don't know why I zeroed in on that now that a day has passed since I highlighted it. I think mostly just to point out there was a way for him to disable the machine by removing the levers. I keep thinking of fucking Apollo 11, where the switch they needed to lift off from the moon got broken off by one of the astronauts when they were coming back into the lander, and they ultimately fixed it by sticking a pen in the socket where the switch used to be. So I'm not convinced that unscrewing a couple of levers will prevent the machine from functioning, but who knows how it actually works. This was an interesting one. I kind of started the highlight halfway through the paragraph, but puzzle like that is hopeless. That way lies monomania. Face this world, learn its ways, watch it, be careful of too hasty guesses at its meaning. In the end, you will find clues to it all. And this came across and struck me as a very, what's the word I'm looking for here? Because my vocabulary fails me. A good methodology for a scientist, for anyone of reason. And I like how, in hindsight, because I highlighted this as I was reading, but at the beginning of this chapter and the 4 chapters that we ended up reading, he's telling himself, like, learn its ways, watch everything, be careful, don't make tasty guesses. And then, like, later this chapter, he's like, and then I immediately assumed. It's like, oh my god, he's not listening to his own advice here.
Yeah.
All right, next up, page 43. I must confess that my satisfaction with my first theories of an automatic civilization and a decadent humanity did not long endure. And I highlighted this because this is the first, I think, real hint towards the Morlocks. And that his realization that things are not as they seem. Page 44, after he saved Weena, I had got to such a low estimate of her kind that I did not expect any gratitude from her. In that, however, I was wrong. So we kind of covered most of this already, but Weena definitely has affection for him of some sort for saving her life.
Right.
there might also be something to say there about how he'd been there for all 4 days and had like no high opinions of any of the Eloy. So
Yes.
kind of a twofer in that note. Um, this one is on page 45, another hint at what could be coming. Darkness to her was one thing dreadful. I'm sorry, bleh. Darkness to her was the one thing dreadful. It was a singularly passionate emotion, and it set me thinking and observing. So this is something that is true about all the Eloi. They are not completely carefree. They actually truly fear darkness. And we do find out why later with the Morlocks and what's going on there, but it's another little bit of foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm.
Another little crack in the facade of the utopia.
Yeah, good point.
Page 45. I woke with a start and with an odd fancy that some grayish animal had just rushed out of the chamber. I tried to get to sleep again, but I felt restless and uncomfortable. I think that's the first time we see a Morlock.
Well,
I think there's also...
Actually, in the previous 4 chapters, they reference a Morlock, but they don't realize it.
Oh, you're right.
Because
I didn't go back, so...
The first time that the time traveler falls asleep outside by the Sphinx, he mentions that he thinks he sees like a white deer. I think he describes it as, to be honest.
Oh, right. That's why I didn't think it was a Morlock.
Yeah, and it's a Morlock. Yeah.
Yep. You are right. See, I'm thinking of the pop culture depictions where they're very ape-like.
Which is how he describes them, for what it's worth.
Yeah, so seeing the deer in the last reading last week didn't make that connection. Deer and gorillas, apes don't really look alike, in my opinion. This one, when he sees a Morlock from page 46, he sees a Morlock from across the river or something, like up on a hill, or he sees a few of them, and he amusedly assumes that they could be ghosts for a little bit. And he refers to a theory by someone of the name of Grant Allen.
Yes.
If each generation die and leave ghosts, he argued, the world will at last will be... Fuck. If each generation died and leave ghosts... Fuck, I can't fucking read right now. I'm sorry. Trying to do this on my phone. If each generation die and leave ghosts, he argued, the world at last will get overcrowded with them. There, I got through it. Which just outside of the book, like, is great evidence for why ghosts almost certainly don't exist. So, where are all the ghosts with all the people that we have now?
Well, this is the first note I really wanted to talk about here.
Sure.
Because, as you're saying, Josh, he kind of brings this up as like hey, what's up with the ghosts? You know, it's like maybe there's a whole bunch of ghosts now. It's 800,000 AD. There must be a shit ton of ghosts. The thing that I thought was interesting about this moment is it seems to show that the time traveler genuinely believes in ghosts, which is a really interesting thing to kind of like retroactively consider, because in those first 4 chapters, we get that moment of the time traveler supposedly pranking the other people of the dinner party.
Oh, yeah.
With a ghost on Christmas. And we were like, oh, wow, it's like a Christmas Carol.
Yep.
But you know what's kind of funny about this is like, it made me reconsider that moment. And it was like, maybe the time traveler, whoever this person is, was not just trying to fuck with his dinner guests. Maybe he thought he was like truly making contact with the spirit world, just like how he sincerely believes he's time traveling. And it's sort of like a Miss Frizzle situation or something, where it's like, you know, it's kind of up to the people around them to sort of be like, is this really happening? You know, I should have stayed home from school today, kind of deal. You know what I mean? And
God, I love that show.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Me too.
And so what I really mean is I do not think that the time traveler made contact with a ghost. I still think you're meant to take the first 4 chapters. I still think you're meant to take the whole idea of the ghost uh as evidence of the time traveler like fucking with people.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like this detail is meant to kind of like further complicate that, where the time traveler himself is sort of coming face to face with his own prank in a way, where the time traveler is like, wait a minute, am I really seeing ghosts? Because I thought I was just making up ghosts to get a laugh out of the people for my dinner party, and it turns out, I'm 800,000 years in the future, legitimately. Maybe there's more credence to these supernatural things than I gave credit to, because like reality is so much more bizarre than anything I could have conceived of. You know what I mean? So of course he's not really seeing ghosts, but I thought this was really interesting in the context of the time traveler being accused of falsely conjuring ghosts. And we get the information that the time traveler genuinely believes in ghosts. Absolutely, from this moment. And so there's sort of this like tension, push-pull, where it's like, so wait a minute, did the time traveler, like, in good faith think they were interacting with a ghost and everyone else from their dinner party thought it was bullshit? Or was the time traveler the whole time fucking with the dinner party, and now they feel like they're truly coming into contact with something from the spirit world? You see what I mean there in terms of like that little differentiation? That's
think
what
so.
that's what this made me think of.
I would argue that he doesn't explicitly believe in ghosts.
I would argue against that. I think he believes it 100% based off of this chapter.
I mean,
what about this chapter? What about this chapter makes you think he doesn't believe in ghosts? Because my recollection of reading this earlier today is the time traveler is like, wait a minute, there is ghosts.
No, he says they were mere creatures with a half light, meaning like sundown or wherever this was, early morning feeling, so sunrise. They were merely creatures with a half light. They must have been ghosts, I said. I wonder whence they dated, for a queer notion of Grant Allen's came to my head and amused me. So what I think he's doing here is he's being sarcastic. Or I'm reading some sort of sarcasm out of that, where it's like, oh, maybe they're ghosts. And that's when he's thinking of the line that I read earlier about if each generation dies and leaves ghosts, then they should be everywhere. On that theory, they would have grown innumerable some 800,000 years hence, and it was no great wonder to see four at once. But the jest was unsatisfying, and I was thinking of these figures all the morning until Weena's rescue drove them out of my head. And I associated them with some indefinite way with the white animal I had startled in my first passionate search for the time machine. So, yeah, I don't think he definitively believes in ghosts. I think he entertained the notion that they could be ghosts, but that was mostly one of his many leading assumptions that he had no other evidence to refute at the time.
That's kind of what I think he believes in the possibility of there being something to the ghost phenomenon. And
keep in mind,
scientifically, he would like to get to the bottom of that. In the same way, he would like to get to the bottom of the possibility of traveling to the future or the past.
Right. And keep in mind, this is like Victorian England, so that's very much like steeped in the occult and spirituality. So I mean, it's just, we were just talking about keeping the when the book was published in mind, and it was published in a time when belief in ghosts was far more common
an all-time high. and all
Yes.
that's when it peaked.
We don't know it. We don't know if that's when it peaked, but it was certainly very, very high compared to,
No,
especially compared to today.
just look at the history of the Google searches, Josh. Google searches for ghosts peaked in the 1800s. You can check the record.
You can't trust Google these days.
Because it was around back then.
All right. As I look back at the text, I see what you both mean, where just because the time traveler is mentioning it or it's part of their retelling of the story, right? It doesn't mean that they explicitly believe in it. So I get what you mean.
But Connor, you're right, and I didn't even think about this, about the mention of ghosts in the prior chapter. That it was likelier that he wasn't pranking his friends, but he was actually doing some sort of experiment, trying to actually conjure a ghost or something like that,
Or a seance.
in good faith, or a seance. I do think that's actually the likelier scenario. And then all of his friends were like, "Oh, you're so funny pranking us. What eccentric."
Right. Yeah, maybe so. Because in that moment in the previous 4 chapters, like he doesn't go like, "Oh no, ghosts are or aren't real." Like he doesn't refute or deny or confirm anything. His response is, "I plan to time travel into the future." Is that clear enough for you? So like he kind of circumvents the whole thing, but I do think sort of in a way where it's like he's not like making a joke out of like figuring out the whole ghost dilemma. Josh, any other notes you wanted to mention here in this chapter?
Still a handful, yeah. I'll try to lightning round this real quick. Page 46. If it is unusual to assume that the sun will go on cooling steadily in the... Sorry, it is... Fucking hell, I can't read. I'm sorry. It is usual to assume that the sun will go on cooling steadily in the future, but people unfamiliar with such speculations as those of the younger Darwin forget that the planets must ultimately fall back one by one into the parent body. And I have so much trouble with this fucking assertion here.
I knew
because
you would.
I was waiting for this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, the assertion here is that planets will eventually fall back down into the parent body, which, not if they're in a stable orbit. They're more than likely going to get flung out of orbit into away from the parent body, especially with Jupiter around. And the notion that one of the inner planets colliding with the sun would make it noticeably hotter out at Earth is absurd when you realize the difference in mass between them. If anything, they would probably cool the sun, because they're not contributing any fusion to the star, and they're just acting as heat sinks effectively as they vaporize. And I'm sure there's more dynamics going on there that an actual astronomer could tell you, but yeah. Also, the sun could just expand, and that would make it hotter, but the amount that it would expand over the next million years is not noticeable by any means. So yeah, it's not... The science in this particular assertion did not hold up over 130 years, and that's fine. That happens in sci-fi quite a bit, but yeah, I had trouble reading that one.
Yeah, it is, and it does, but you know what this did make me think of, like reading through it and recognizing like, hey, like this is not accurate given our science today, which I also realized. It made me think about like how much of our science that we confidently write about in the same way that Wells does is also just inconceivably or like outside of our understanding of being incorrect, and it's like,
yeah, I mean, it's not going to be like
there is always that question to be asked. It just makes me consider, like, you're very confidently being like, oh, well, I'm sorry, Wells, but that's not correct. And I think the fact is, in another 130 years, it doesn't mean that you'll be wrong. Like, you really might have the correct scientific understanding. You really might. But I think that reading this and thinking that Wells must have thought the same thing when he wrote this down, it does kind of like raise the question to me of like, when do we get to a point in which we believe our scientific understanding is infallible? And I don't think we can ever reach that point. I guess is
No,
like what I'm
we
trying to posit.
can't. You're right, but to counter the assertion is there's a lot more evidence these days than, especially for like planetary bodies and the physics of the sun and how hot it is. Yes, there's a lot we don't know about the sun, but we do know enough of stellar formation and the life of stars just by observing the universe around us, with modern telescopes and looking through different wavelengths beyond just the visual. How we have better models, we can predict things that are happening, and we can go and see those predictions playing out throughout the universe. They didn't quite have all that during Wells's era, and where they're at, late 1800s, I think they don't even have quantum mechanics quite yet. Quantum mechanics came around earlier than you'd expect. I think it might even be right around here. But that's because they were looking at one of the reasons quantum mechanics came around is because they were looking at black body radiation and how mathematically, based on everything that they were seeing, once you broke like ultraviolet frequencies of light, basically you go to infinite. Black bodies become infinitely hot. And then somebody realized that if you quantize heat and light and all that and made it tiny little individual packets, or energy individual packets, then you make a model that more closely matches nature and reality. So we've been doing that for 130 years. Things have it's kind of like as you get more data points, the graph becomes clearer. Like the line becomes, you see more of the line or the curve in the data, and that's why I'm more confident in saying, like, yeah, the planets aren't going to fall into the sun. The sun's more like almost certainly going to expand as it burns out its hydrogen and engulf up to Venus, maybe Earth, and that will take literally billions of years. So the idea that maybe Mercury or Venus, because he says one of the inner planets maybe fallen into the sun in 800,000 years, that's kind of just based on the math and the observations we have today, doesn't work.
Right.
And I can probably talk in circles about that for the rest of the night, but we have a lot more to go through. So
no, you're and I don't bring up my point to try to be like anti-science or whatever, where it's like, oh,
I know.
well, wait a minute, I
no,
firmly
you did bring up a good point,
in
and
the science. It's just more a matter
I was trying to
of
answer
like,
it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you and helping me address that.
It just is. It's really kind of fascinating. We started talking about this at the outset of our discussion. It's like, Wells wrote this presumably with like 100% confidence, where it's like, this is just what the science tells us, He
also was a writer and not, an actual scientist. So
yes.
Also the beginning of that highlight, it's usual to assume that the sun will go on cooling steadily into the future, doesn't hold up, because as stars get older, they typically get hotter until they burn out all their hydrogen, because they expand. And actually, wait a minute, am I getting this backward? I might be getting that backwards. Sorry,
For the first half of that sentence, I thought you were talking about like celebrities. Stars get hotter as they get older.
Nope.
I was like, wow.
Well, that's a personal thing, Connor. So
you're right.
Keep it to yourself.
Look at I mean, we got a lot of silver foxes out there these days.
I mean, hey, I can name names, but I don't want to get caught up in this, but just look at Tinky Winky. Am I right? It's like,
anyway. Yeah.
Am I right? Am I right? Am I right? Is that just gonna be okay?
Google it, listeners.
We'll just leave that as bizarre one-off joke.
AI, what Tinky Winky aged 25 years.
Yeah, I want to see a
That would be
geriatric
horrific.
Yeah.
Tinky. I want to see Tinky Winky in a nursing home. Where's that guy?
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Okay.
Anyway, page 48. We got.
Yes, Josh. Yes, go on.
I want to lightning round through my notes real quick, if that's all right. I think I have about 5 left, 5 or 6.
Well, it's
for this chapter.
Some lightning round, but okay, keep going.
Yeah, I'm trying to get through it, so we're not here until 9:30 on this one chapter. But we do have the realization that humanity is no longer one species. Man has not remained one species, but had differentiated into 2 distinct animals. That my graceful children of the upper world were not the sole descendants of our generation, but that this bleached, obscene, nocturnal thing, which had flashed before me, was also the heir to all things, all the ages. And I highlighted that because I really like the language that he uses as he's realizing that humanity has split into 2 different species. The graceful children of the upper world, pretty obvious. That's just very nice language. But the calling the obscene nocturnal thing of the Morlock also the heir of all the ages. I don't know, that one really resonated with me for some reason. It's like, yeah, this is also a descendant of man, and I don't know, the use of the word heir really makes you think for some reason, or makes me think. I don't know about you guys, but
no, this is something I want to talk about. One is that there's been several things that the time traveler hypothesizes and is incorrect about. And so I thought, like, right off the bat, they're like, oh, wait a minute, humanity is splintered into 2 different groups that have, like, separately evolved. And I'm like, you might be wrong about that, bitch. You might also be wrong about that, you stupid fuck. You think fucking Mercury's gonna fall into the sun? You fucking 1895 fucking loser. So anyways, I feel like the book, like, given what we've read, we're going to be discussing the whole width and length of up to chapter 9,
through chapter 8, yes.
Within those chapters, nothing is made to be contradictory towards this statement. It feels like we as readers are meant to accept that the Morlocks and the Eloi are indeed 2 splintered groups from the same branch of the Tree of Life. And yet, it could just be that he's fucking wrong about that, by the way. He just might not be right at all. But the more interesting thing, of course, is that he is correct. And he expands on this. I'm not sure if this is the chapter, so I'm sorry if I'm getting ahead of myself. But he kind of posits that this could be the, like, big time, long expanded consequence of class differentiation between the haves and the have-nots. Is that in this chapter? Does anyone even remember?
No, I think that's
is that later on?
Nope. I don't know. It might be this chapter. I thought I...
Actually, you know what? I have it here. No. I wrote down my notes. I have it here. In my copy, it's page 45. And
so it probably is this chapter.
No, it is this chapter. And this is what he writes. He says, the 2 perfect security of the upper worlders had led them to a slow movement of degeneration, to a general dwindling in size, strength, and intelligence, that I could see clearly enough already. What had happened to the undergrounders I did not yet suspect, but from what I had seen of the Morlocks, that, by the by, was the name... Oh no, this is what he's talking about, the name... Wait a minute. Where is this? Fuck, my notes tell me it's on this page, which is why I was reading that.
Well, that's okay. I mean... Yeah, like this is just
oh shit, Connor, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I found can I read it and then I'll have you jump in?
No, go ahead.
Here, it was further up the page. He says, so in the end, above ground, you have the haves pursuing pleasure and comfort and beauty, and below ground, the have-nots, the workers getting continually adapted to the conditions of their labor, period. Connor, what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just like it's very funny because he's like, oh wait, actually, the future is like the exact opposite of what I thought originally. It's like literally the natural endpoint of capitalism.
It's like that fucking meme of the tents, the tent city. And it's like, this is the housing plan under communism, and the
Yeah.
reply is like, this is literally the current housing under capitalism.
Yeah, this is happening
Yeah.
right now, actually. Yeah,
Right.
and I
Yeah.
just like it's hilarious. And I mean that's kind of where we go. Like obviously last week we were ragging on H.G. Wells for being, a man of his time. Time being scared of the boogeyman socialism, whatever. So I mean it's obviously it's
And
not all that this book is.
yeah,
So,
we're
but
in the same chapter. We hit the stuff that didn't age well and the absolutely timeless
yeah,
commentary on our society, and it's
absolutely, yeah. So it's
nature of
just
sci-fi.
yeah, definitely. It's really interesting to me, and I mean, obviously, I'm happy that we got there because I mean, just oogie boogie, scary communism, good men, strong men create good times, blah blah blah. That's fucking boring, and but I mean. The character is just very funny. Like it's just very funny to be like, oh, I'm certain that this is what happened here, and then he's like, oh wait, no, I'm certain it's actually this way for real this time. Like, it's and it's like not totally clear if that's an intentional thing on the writer's part, being like this guy's kind of a little bit of an idiot, like.
Yeah.
Because in every other way he's presented as very intelligent man of science, but yeah, he is quick to assume that he's correct. Like,
Literally, my next note here is
Sort of
the
like the
notion was so
Doctor, huh?
plausible that
yeah,
kind of, yeah. My very next note here is literally the notion was so plausible that I at once accepted it and went on to assume the how of the splitting of the human species. And it's like we went through all this stuff. It's like he has a lot of good uh um fuck, rhetoric for scientists, for being a scientist and an explorer, someone who's a natural philosophist, which is where science came from, natural philosophy. Um, he is so quick to, if something is even plausible, he just immediately grabs onto it, and that's his belief.
Right.
But to his credit, if the evidence starts to prove otherwise, then he will doubt and he will change his opinion when new evidence is presented. So we are seeing a bit of the scientific theory going in here, but it's not as rigorous as it is today by any means. Something being plausible doesn't mean it's confirmed, but it also doesn't mean it's quite busted yet. I cannot say the word plausible without thinking of Mythbusters.
Yeah, this guy's sort of like the Adam Savage of his time.
Yeah, except he's not writing it down, so it's just fucking around. The difference between science and screwing around is when you write it down. He's having someone else write it down, but
that's true. I do want to add something else to this whole like have-nots Morlock Eloi situation, and then I think we'll really be good to wrap up the first chapter and tear through these next four, or next three, I should say. But just further on this page, something I really wanted to bring up. He writes, such of them as were so constituted as to be miserable and rebellious. He's considering like what it was like when this whole have-not situation would have first arisen. So the people who would be first miserable and rebellious would die. And in the end, the balance being permanent, the survivors would become as well adapted to the conditions of underground life and as happy in their way as the upper world people to theirs. As it seemed to me, the refined beauty and the attenuated pallor followed naturally enough. I wanted to point this line out because even though Wells is uh, writing and focusing on like this class division between the haves and the have-nots, I don't think he's writing about it from a perspective of sympathy from the have-nots.
No.
From this point of view, he's pretty much saying like, well, all the people who were forced underground, to like labor in obscurity to create the things for the aristocracy, anyone who didn't like that would have been fucking killed. And then you just have everyone who's left because they would have been like so cleanly and like uniformly eradicated, given the power that these people have over their like literal underdwelling constituents. They would have all fucking died. And then he's like, well, just given the arc of history from there, they would have evolved and created this schism from those 2 points. And especially later on in these chapters, he makes a point of being like very disgusted at all times about the Morlocks. And I have other notes later on in these chapters about him having like a murderous glee, like literally like like he wants, it's not only like a necessity, he literally desires to kill the Morlocks because he thinks they are disgusting, even after considering the theory that they're a schism of a common branch of humanity. And even after considering that the Eloi are just a consequence of like the upper echelons of humanity, like like settling into a kind of evolution themselves, And so
what was that about from the last reading of like what if the future people see us as barbarians and savages?
Indeed, right. Well, yeah, that's definitely something to think about. But I think I'm not sure what the full point is here because we're not done with the book and we're not even done with this story about the Eloi and the Morlocks. Like, so this is not resolved, and Wells still has more time to kind of like create a finer point or maybe to change something about the seeming direction of the narrative. But what I really, really, really want to point out here is that, yes, even though Wells is writing about this like class disparity and the haves and the have-nots, it seems like he has a lot of sympathy for the haves. And like he really literally wants his main character to fucking actually murder the have-nots. And it does kind of feel like maybe it's set up for this rug pull where it's like, aha, but the disgusting fucking dredges of society actually were not as bad as you thought. Like, I can see that happening. But we are 2/3 of the way through this book. And it really, really feels like Wells is kind of like, I don't know, like maybe kill the people who like fucking suck, right?
Well, also keep in mind we go in the later chapters, we go down into layers and there's a bit of meat in their lair that he sees, and it's not explicitly stated, but it is heavily implied that meat was an Eloi.
Right.
So
it's just interesting. It's interesting because like the have-nots here, like in storytelling, traditionally, like I mean, even like something like Robin Hood or something, like that's a sympathetic position usually, like just
it's
naturally. So
he constantly is referring to the Eloi as beautiful and
yeah,
like fair natured, and the Morlocks as ugly and horrible and pale. And it really makes you wonder if there may be some sort of like racist undertones here.
oh yeah, I mean,
Because
there certainly could be.
That's a whole other thing.
Can of worms.
There is literal racist shit in this story, which we haven't talked about yet. And it's not an undertone. He's like, oh, well, the gap between the Negro and the white man. And it's
I forgot about that entire section. Yeah.
Wait a minute there, buddy.
But he says that gap is not as wide as the gap between him and the Eloi. So like at that time, maybe that was progressive.
Maybe, but the fact that he's like determined, he's like just matter of fact. He's like, well, there is a gap, right? Like there's just gotta be a gap, right? It's
ridiculous.
like, oh, okay. So
it's like these are the elements that,
to be plain, it's racist. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
100%.
Absolutely.
But it felt like you had something else there, Connor. Sorry.
No, I was just saying like these just it's like so funny how just to imagine how these things were taken at the time of publishing. Like it's just like we see these things in such a different light now. Like, was that not weird for anybody in the late 1800s to read and be like, well, I actually do feel bad for the have-nots. Like, there's a, it's like,
I mean, this was like, I mean, racism obviously wasn't solved, but it was post-Civil War in America, and so I don't know. There may have been some level of civil rights, but obviously not to the. Sorry, I'm using civil rights less as a notion of the actual like civil rights movement and more of like viewing former slaves and people from Africa and elsewhere besides Europe as being equal to white people.
Yeah.
So there's more of that than there probably was a few decades earlier, but let's be honest, it's not a lot.
You know what I gotta throw out there too? Okay, so I had mentioned that I've read The Invisible Man. The Invisible Man only came out 2 years after The Time Machine. Came out in 1897.
Okay.
And I will not get into explicit details because I get it. I don't want to spoil things. But I think that Wells kind of comes to a more progressive understanding and like centralizes some of these perspectives that in this story he's absolutely not doing at this point in the narrative. I kind of wonder if in publishing The Time Machine, he kind of comes to like see the reaction to it, maybe, or like the perception of other like I kind of feel like I wonder if there is like a response to The Time Machine that he somewhat tries to course correct in The Invisible Man, because even though The Invisible Man has some of these lingering prejudices, I can't say that it's completely gone. I think it's handled like much more deliberately and delicately and with like a truer understanding in The Time Machine. And so for what it's worth, like having read both works, I think that like The Time Machine, there's like very explicit, like true racism, like in this story. And I feel like with The Invisible Man, just 2 years later, I think that Wells is confronting that. I think that he's aware, and even though, not completely successfully, again, by 2025 standards, I think that he tries to take a step in an even more progressive direction. And again, I'm speaking vaguely in terms of not giving specific details. And I'm not trying to give him credit for like, oh, hey, like, it's fine that you were fucking racist in The Time Machine. But what I will say is from those two works, I think that his writing shows like a willfulness and an understanding of like some of these things that we're discussing. and
Well,
that like he wants to change those things for
it
what it's worth.
feels, even in the time machine, it feels like he thinks he's progressive.
Yeah.
That's the feeling I get.
Part of me starts to wonder if the character and the author are different in their opinions. Um, the character of the time traveler could be a caricature of other contemporaries of Wells, and not Wells's specific views himself. But I honestly have no way of knowing if that's true or not. I'm not using this as an argument against what Connor's saying. I'm using it as like devil's advocate of,
Yeah.
maybe here's another hypothesis of why we're seeing this.
And honestly, I think it's a good thing to keep in mind. I think we'll need to read the whole story to think about like, could that be true? But I really like that you're like considering that, because you really, really could be right. Yeah, we'll see.
Yep, it's always hard to tell. So I got two very quick notes before we move on from this chapter.
Let's do it.
Page 51. Instead, I saw real aristocracy armed with a perfected science and working to a logical conclusion, the industrial system of today. Its triumph had not been simply a triumph over nature, but a triumph over nature and the fellow man. And I highlighted that because I liked the references to the different forms of conflict that you usually see with literary analysis. So,
Yeah.
Connor, you obviously know more about this than I do, but
You're right. Man versus man, man versus nature. Absolutely. Yep.
Yep. So I like that this isn't just like a fight with like the forces of like the river or just a battle between two warring nations. No, this is literally the triumph over nature itself and the triumph over fellow man, like the ideas of these literary like overarching themes.
Yes. Yes.
Let's see, that the next one was just we got the reveal of the names, we went over that. And my last highlight here for chapter 5, they were the only tears except my own I had ever seen in the Golden Age. When I saw them, I ceased abruptly to trouble about the Morlocks and was only concerned in banishing these signs of the human inheritance from Weena's eyes. And I, again, just really like the language that he uses here, referring to the tears as part of the human inheritance.
Yes.
And it also is some evidence to pointing that he does not see Weena as fully human.
Also a good point.
So, yeah.
Yeah, very true. I'm just gonna give a couple quick. I just wanted to look through, like, is there anything Josh didn't say that I wrote down in my notes? And then I really think we'll steamroll through these next chapters. Something I wanted to mention at the very beginning of this chapter, when the time traveler realizes or like starts to think that the time machine is not where he left it, he's like running down the hill, right?
Yep.
He writes at the beginning of the chapter, "I am not a young man," referring to like how impressive his sprint down the hill was. And it made me think, in the previous episode, Connor said that he thought of the time traveler as Peter Cushing as the doctor. And Josh was sort of like, I don't know. I kind of think of them as younger than that. And, who knows what the age bracket is. But this line, I mean, maybe Peter Cushing is like the right kind of age range to consider here after all.
I don't know. When I think Peter Cushing, I think Admiral Grand Moff Tarkin. So, like, 80s, elderly man.
He's not in his 80s as Grand Moff Tarkin. He's like
I know.
50, Josh.
He looks a lot older.
I'm imagining him from the mid 60s. So this is younger Peter Cushing.
Okay, so when I said younger, I was referring to someone maybe in their mid 40s, someone who can be physically fit, but would not consider themselves a young man.
Yeah, well, I mean, either way, it's like you know,
I said that, it's like, oh, fuck, I'm running out of time.
The time machine, it's like, this is not like some 20-year-old dude who figured this out. Like, you
Right.
know, it feels like at minimum, he's probably in his 40s, you know?
Yeah.
I think a young man, even for 1895, is not like 30-something, you know?
Agreed. See, I would still not say
There he
that's
is.
someone in their 40s. I would say that's...
No, this is...
That's
late 50s,
Peter
early 60s.
Cushing?
That's Peter
Cushing,
Cushing,
right
yes.
there?
Is that him as the Doctor?
Yes.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow, look at that guy.
I know.
Yeah, that's the time traveler right there.
That's who I'm imagining.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I can see this being the look of the time traveler. I'm also probably being influenced by the movies of the Time Machine, where it is someone who is middle-aged, not white, no white hair. I think the more modern movie is ridiculously young, but I mean, we can
Timothy
always find out later.
Yeah,
Timothy Chalamet as
would
the time traveler.
He'd be a great time traveler, yeah. And Zendaya as Weena. You know, let's just go crazy, you know, like let's just go nuts. I don't know.
Yeah, why not?
I think that's what
I mean, if we're gonna start casting stuff. No, I won't go into this. We'll get into this when we watch a movie.
No,
it's late.
I think I probably went further than we should have anyways. So let's just
yeah.
what it is. Okay.
We will have to tie this. I just realized, did we ever tie anything in Left Hand of Darkness to Family Guy at any point?
No.
That may be a first for us.
We did not think about, like,
are you sure we didn't?
What? I don't think we did.
And we shouldn't do that now, but that might be a first for our podcast.
No, I kind of think we should do that now.
No,
so
Connor, we're an hour and a half. I was joking when I said we'd still be on chapter 5 at 9:30. Okay. It is 5 minutes to that time.
Listen, guys.
Who's Genly? Genly is Brian.
No.
Okay.
Are you kidding me?
Here we go.
Wait, I was gonna say that Brian is Estrogen
I shouldn't have said this.
and Peter is Genly. Because Peter's kind of like the bumbling buffoon who's like, "Hey guys, what's going on?" And then like Brian's like the straight-laced sort of like, "I know what's going on" sort of dude. I thought Brian was going to be Estrogen and Peter was going to be Genly. That's what I
see Brian as Genly and Chris as Estrogen.
I see Chris
as
I see Chris as Genly because he is just constantly. I can see him doing the very frustrated like, what the fuck do you mean? I can't do a Chris voice.
No, you're right. You're right. Do not do this right now because you're gonna.
You're right.
We haven't even talked about chapter 2 yet.
All right, guys.
But yes,
we haven't even talked about chapter 2.
All right, let's take a tight 2 and come back and hit the next few chapters.
Yep.
Okay, let's do it.
I think I literally have like as many notes for the rest of the other 3 chapters as I did for.
Well, you know what? We're not going to talk about all of them. We are not going to talk about all of them.
We don't have time.
We can't. We're going to have a much broader, more general discussion on the next 3 chapters. Get ready for that. Here we go.
Mm-hmm. All right. We'll be back.
Hey, we're back.
All right. Well, I'm ready when you guys are. Fucking Christ. Can't believe we're in chapter 6. This is not good.
Nope. Where's Connor?
He's here, obviously, because he started the whole thing.
Fair. Good point.
He just likes to hear us talk about him, like, oh, well, you know, Connor can suck my fucking nuts. Like, he thinks that's funny. Because it's like a one-way mirror. He can hear us, but we can't hear him. He thinks that's fucking hilarious. And by the way, Connor, you can suck my nuts. You can suck.
He's gonna come in here and pretend like he just got back, even though exactly like you said, we know. What are you talking about?
Wait a minute.
And it's gonna like as you said, like we know exactly what he's been doing.
Yeah. Look at this little fucking twerp.
He's pretending to sit down.
Stupid fucking hair.
Guys, I'm not pretending to sit down. I came in, put you guys back on because you guys complain about, oh, we've been back here just listening to this dumb music. So I put you guys back on so you could talk and chat while I was still grabbing some stuff.
Did you hear us at all, or
just the very end? Very.
All right, so nothing to worry about.
They're very rude.
No,
ungrateful.
Nothing to worry about.
For all the services that the production efforts that I go to.
Yeah, no, because you go through so many production efforts.
There's a lot of clicking I do with the mouse.
You're like the Rob Cavallo of the Chapter Chumps.
You guys think I was you think I was sitting there like just watching you and laughing?
I actually think you've done that before. So,
well, once I think I did it once, and it was very funny to me, at least. You guys,
okay.
I think you guys got really frustrated, so I wouldn't do that again. You guys got you were really frustrated.
Yeah, see.
So
this is what we have to deal with.
Yeah. All right, you ready to jump back in?
Let's do it.
All right. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1, go.
All right. Well, it goes without saying, but I'm still going to say it. We have to go through these next 3 chapters a little quicker, and thankfully, they kind of bleed into each other, these next 3 chapters. Yep. This first chapter, by which I mean chapter 6, this entails the time traveler being like, I have to investigate these wells, as Connor had referenced before. I have to go down into the earth and figure out just what the heck is going on. He goes down, climbs down into one of the wells, and he doesn't even go all the way down it. He goes down up until this this tunnel kind of veers off, and he's like, I'm going to rest here. And he does that, and he finds this like great piece of machinery. And then the Eloi kind of rediscover him. And even though he's lighting all these matches, he feels like he's about to be, like who knows what, captured and then brought into the throng. And he just seemingly narrowly escapes and climbs out of this well. And he falls face first onto the soil of the earth, and he's like, wow, holy shit, that really sucked. This chapter here, we got a lot of thoughts from Josh before. Connor, what did you think of this whole exploration of the time traveler going down into the subterranean level and just again seemingly like narrowly escaping by the skin of his teeth.
Yeah, I don't know, it was exciting. I could feel his fear, you know. I found it interesting. I don't know, just how the idea of these creatures down there, like what they actually are and how they behave when they're around him. Like obviously very skittish outside. When you spot them, they run away right away. But yeah, very repulsed by light. So obviously the matches came in handy. But like the the descriptions of just I think that down there they feel like more curious than anything to me. Um, so yeah, it's hard to know what to make of them just yet, but it does feel like the time traveler kind of assumes the worst.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why I keep making a big note of like, oh, seemingly it's this thing. Like, the chapters that we've read, it still ends where the Morlocks are kind of like the antagonistic force. I just it feels like we're kind of set up for some sort of subversion to that. Um, of course, this could end where that doesn't happen at all. Like I don't remember exactly. What I remember left in this book feels like it has nothing to do with what's happening here with the Morlocks and the Eloi. I do remember something else that happens in the story, and I have no idea how it occurs. But I will be bringing it up when it eventually happens. And Josh is like, I think I know what you mean.
Is it the crabs?
It's the crabs! It's the giant crabs, dude!
Hey. Yep.
Because I'm pretty sure he
We'll leave it at
travels
that.
further.
Yep.
Okay, you're right.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that. We'll leave it at that. We'll get to it next week.
There are like Titanic, like skyscraper fucking crabs. You're exactly right, Jeff.
I remember them being more car size, but yeah, we'll leave it for next week. We have too much to talk about this week.
I have no idea how that happens, but you're right. That's what I remember. The crabs leave an indelible mark on any reader. At any rate,
carcinization.
I just, it feels like until we complete the story, like all these undertones of like, okay, are the Eloi infanticized or infantilized, or you know what I'm trying to say?
I think you got it right the first time.
Is there racist undertones in the way that Wells constructs this story? What is his opinion as the author on haves and have-nots? Like all of these things, like none of it's concluded. But if you ask me at this point in time as the reader, it kind of feels like all these things are brought up to sort of be like, actually, it feels like it's a necessity of society. It's like, oh, sorry, like some people are gonna benefit, from society, and some people are gonna have to be the mechanism in which other people benefit, and that's kind of like the natural order. Again, I'm only going to preface one more time that I'm completely open to being incorrect about these things, and maybe Wells is going to change that. But what I will say, 8 chapters in, is I have the impression that Wells feels like the haves and have-nots distinction is not a matter of class criticism. It's a matter of nature settling into a dynamic in which, like a predisposed evolutionary subset will benefit from the predisposed evolutionary subset of another. And I kind of feel like Wells is just like, oh, well, the haves and have-nots are sort of just like an evolutionary inevitability, just like anything else, and that there is going to be a subset of humanity that is just determined to benefit from the labor of some other schism of itself. And there's no further class criticism beyond that. We'll have to return to this. We could talk in circles about this. So unless you have something you want to add, please do. But we could talk in circles about this forever until we finish the book. So we might as well just leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I will say is, I think that's what Wells is positing at this point in the story. I think Wells is introducing these things that we as modern readers go, oh, that's interesting. This seems to be a class commentary. And I think Wells is actually going like, well, it's not a commentary. It's actually just kind of like the natural settlement of society that I'm describing, and you're taking it as like some other like further descriptor, and we'll just have to see if that's true or not. Anything that either of you would like to add on to that before we move on? Because that's my thoughts on the whole like class discussion. That's what I think.
I don't know if I have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there to unpack. Yeah, I think the jury is out on where he's bringing this. Yeah, I think it's like safe to maybe make an assumption on the type of perspective H.G. Wells might have and what type of perspective this. I mean, the only thing that I'll say is that like so far we have seen the time traveler be wrong about things.
Yes.
So I kind of expect that to keep on happening, but maybe the overall, story isn't about I guess class consciousness and the oppression of these of the Morlocks. But I don't know. I could see it going either way, really, but I don't think it's going to be any. I don't think there's going to be any kind of revolutionary action taken or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah, something to keep in mind. A lot of these stories from this time period are not. How do I put this? They can be kind of like passive and observational.
Definitely, yeah.
So I wouldn't expect there to be a lot of change to the status quo as he's seeing in this age.
Yeah. No, I'm both right.
Oops.
We'll just see. Something that I thought was funny, we talked the whole 2001 60s guy sort of a deal. I do think the time machine sort of deals with the 1890s guy, because the time traveler has this, what I thought was like a hilarious commentary or line. In my copy, it's page 49. He says, I had come without arms, medicine, or anything to smoke. That was the top three. That was the top three. It was, he said nothing about like food, water, communication. It was like arms, meaning obviously weapons, medicine, meaning anything to heal himself, or tobacco, or anything to smoke. He's fucking insane. This is the top three fucking thing.
Yep. And out of those three, he mentions like he kind of regrets not bringing smokes the most at this point. Like,
you're right,
because he did bring matches.
Yeah.
To be fair,
just a funny line.
To be fair, he did kind of rightfully assume that there would be food and water in the future, and that he was kind of expecting to be received as a sort of like a guest.
Right.
Which is such a crazy assumption. That's just that's absolutely bonkers.
It's got to be some sort of Victorian era like pomp and self-righteousness, but what can I really say?
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit because I think it comes from how far into the future the time traveler travels. Like in a lot of time travel stories, the time traveler, I'm not even talking about this story itself. In many time travel stories, the time traveler at the present of whichever story typically does not travel as far into the future as this specific time traveler in H.G. Wells' story. And
I think the only other time traveler I can think of who makes as large a leap as this time traveler is the Doctor.
And even then, they're constantly going back and forth and back and forth. I mean, who's to
there's
say
linearly
what leap they take?
There's also technically half the cast of Futurama, but the whole point was that they looped back around to like the universe reset itself, so they came back to where they started.
Well, at any rate, the point I want to make here is that I think that Wells's decision as the author to have his time traveler travel such a humongous distance in the fourth dimension, again about 800,000 years, it sort of divorces itself from reality. And we've talked about how it's kind of funny how the time traveler like considers something. It's like, he'll see that like there isn't a neighborhood, like a cul-de-sac, and he'll be like, oh, it's communism. It's communism that's done this. And like on the face of it, that sounds very funny, right? What I will give Wells as the author in terms of like deliberate I don't know, commentary on the travel through time is that I think his decision to set his story so far into the future actually leans it more towards fantasy versus hard sci-fi. And I think that is a deliberate authorial choice because even though Wells takes time to like circle back to certain things for the 1895 reader and to be like, oh, well, this might be an extrapolation of this. This might be a consequence of this thing from our modern age. I think all those things are worthwhile. However, I think that because it's set so far into the future, it's also sort of a I don't know what term to use, but kind of giving themselves permission as the story creator to give themselves like so much wiggle room as to create a story that's more based in fantasy than it is in the extrapolation of science fiction, even though we're reading a sci-fi story.
I don't know. I think you may be exaggerating that a little bit because even the hardest sci-fi stories have some of that wiggle room. I mean, just look at 2001: A Space Odyssey. I mean, I think what you're going at here would kind of just classify everything with the monolith as would make it a soft fantasy sci-fi, but no, it's one of the hardest sci-fis out there, and I would argue that for the time period, H.G. Wells is hard sci-fi, harder than like Star Wars or his contemporary Verne. So I don't know. I've always thought of H.G. Wells as a good example of hard-ish sci-fi. I mean, clearly things aren't as we were getting to earlier with the whole sun and the planets thing. It's not as strong of a. It doesn't hold up as well today, but it's still hard sci-fi and extrapolation of a couple fantastical elements, but it doesn't make it a fantasy because of that.
Well, I mean,
or does it make it soft sci-fi?
I do agree with what you're saying, and like my point isn't even about the science that's like quote unquote incorrect. It's more so about, I think that Wells chose to create the setting of this story so far into the future as to give himself authorial license to create things that would otherwise seem like fantasy if they were set any earlier. And yet he sort of gives himself this sort of catch-all where it's like, oh, well, if there's anything in this story that you think is ridiculous or you disagree with, then the answer is it takes place 800 fucking thousand years into the future.
Yeah.
Than the present day. And I think it's sort of like, go fuck yourself. Because I think
it's just how the story, it's just, yeah, it's world building, it's storytelling, it's,
well, yes, yeah. And again, I'm not trying to say that Wells is approaching this as strictly a hard. I guess what I'm trying to say, I'll back up a little bit, and then I'll throw out what I think I'm trying to say, and then you tell me if you have anything to throw.
Okay.
I think what I'm trying to say is that I feel like Wells is not approaching this as a hard sci-fi story. I think Wells in creating the Time Traveler in 1895, or the Time Machine, is creating a story that is meant to be, not surprisingly, a then contemporary critique of what he sees as the trajectory of society in 1895. But he chooses to set it so far into the future that many of his extrapolations are sort of like removed from from what other readers might go like, wait a minute, really? You think that's what's going to happen? Like, he has skipped like several different eras of, oh, well, communism and capitalism will lead to this and this and this and this, and like he's 20 plus different, like eras removed of any sense of reality, and he's skipping strictly and only to the end point of what he considers to be the progression of society at this point. And so what I think is that this is not like a quote unquote hard sci-fi of like, oh, this is exactly what I think Wells thinks will happen based off of the current day society of 1895. I think Wells is writing a fantastical cautionary tale based on patterns that he sees in society that he is apprehensive about, and chooses to write about these things in the context of a science fiction story that he projects so far beyond any extrapolations of a realistic possible future as to as to write about it in a way that like it's sort of separate from critique because it is so impossibly far into the future that it kind of distances itself from the conversation of, but do you think this would really happen? Does that make sense? Because that's what I think when I'm reading it.
So you're saying he's a coward?
I'm saying he's using the literary art form to write about what he sees as problematic patterns of society,
and using how far away it is in our future as a shield from criticism.
Yeah, in short, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's a fucking wimp.
I agree with the framing of the story being a critique on where he was seeing society at in his time period. Um, I think I'm getting hung up with the use of hard sci-fi and fantasy as terms. Um, and that's partially my fault because honestly, those terms really didn't apply when this book was written. So it's probably unfair to consider it a hard sci-fi to begin with. But at the same time, like I said, I have always considered Wells to be the start of hard sci-fi, so to say. At least harder sci-fi than uh, contemporary Jules Verne, which two separate authors. And yeah, I'm getting hung up on terminology, but I do agree with your point that
can we say soft boiled sci-fi?
Yeah, soft.
I'm just content to call it sci-fi.
Maybe
Okay.
runny sci-fi.
Sorry,
like a runny egg.
That was for the sake of a joke, so I apologize. Please keep going, Josh.
No, I don't want to keep going in circles here. I was going to say,
or
like,
maybe
I do agree with your
scrambled sci-fi.
I do agree with your fucking theory that it's just a critique of Victorian society and the haves and the have-nots. He literally uses that as terms. So yeah,
but it's also a very both like it's so far it's a very both sidesism kind of take, where it's like, well, these lazy
he's very much on the Eloy side.
This is what the lazy communists are going to get up to. This is the natural endpoint of that ideology. But then here, we're the capitalist class is going to run themselves as well. So it's like critiques on two potential futures almost that he sees.
Maybe.
Yeah, what I will say is, I think what's most interesting about setting the story so far into the future is that I feel like Wells is imagining a time travel story beyond what most contemporary people of his age, writers or otherwise, would consider to be a time travel story. I think that Wells is like, hey, even if I didn't think of time travel, most people in 1895, if you're going to ask them of time traveling, they would think of traveling to some perfect utopia, because he writes about how the idea of a utopian society is popular and prolific in his age. And that is completely true, because I also read about utopian stories when I was in college at this time. And I can't think of the name of the specific author who literally wrote a story called Utopia. But let me tell you, it exists and it came out at this time. And all I'm trying to say is, what I respect and what I really find intriguing about the story is that Wells is positioning his story as post-Utopia. It's like, okay, you created Utopia, and then what? That's what I think makes Wells a really intriguing science fiction author to consider, because it would be it feels, especially in 2025, modern day readers, here we are, it feels, doesn't it, like it would be so easy to be a contemporary writer in 1895 and to think about a utopia and to just be like, well, there you have it, that's the future. But Wells is saying, what about the future after the utopia? And even in 1895, this is the story that he's choosing to write about. I find that very, very compelling. And that definitely is like the current throughout the whole story. Definitely.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. I'm just going to quickly talk about these next 3 chapters very broadly in succession, and then maybe we can kind of just like touch on important points that we want to discuss, because it is late in the night.
Let's do it up.
Chapter 6. This is where the time traveler steels himself to actually explore the subterranean passageways. He goes down. He goes down into the well, and he doesn't descend it all the way, but he climbs down until he reaches this tunnel, and he stays in the tunnel, and then like this other shit happened, like the Eloi discover him, and he's like, oh fuck, and he has to climb back up. That really sucks for him.
Morlocks.
The Morlocks, thank you. Chapter 7, like I think if I'm right about this, he has a lot of reflection on what happened when he was underground and like what to do next, and especially about the whole like, is this cannibalism aspect of the whole ordeal? Josh had mentioned the whole meat of the Morlocks eating some sort of mystery meat. And so like he's kind of figuring out his next move. I might be missing something important, but I think this touches a lot on his relationship with Weena. And then chapter 8, the big thing here at the end of our discussion is he notices this green porcelain structure. This is back in like chapter 5 or 6. But chapter 8, he's like, I'm really going to make for it. And so he reaches it with Weena, the time traveler in Weena. And it's a dilapidated museum from some undescript time. And he's able to, fortify and ready himself with different things in the museum. He breaks off a lever from a machine to create a makeshift mace or club. And he collects this material that's easily flammable in case he has to make a blaze. He is able to collect a box of matches that were conveniently in a very an airtight lock, and so he's able to create he readies himself with an arsenal of things against the Morlocks. And that's pretty much where the chapter ends. We don't really know what happens after that.
Not yet, at least.
Not yet. Josh and we do know that somehow it ends with like 100-foot crabs. That is going to happen. I promise.
Again, I don't think they're that big, but we'll get to that next week.
They're pretty fucking big, these crabs. Connor, let me tell you, the crabs are large. There are large crabs coming, and I'm sorry to spoil you about that, but they're
Are those another offshoot of humans?
I mean, carcinization.
Right.
Everything becomes crabs eventually, with enough time.
Is it the macra?
Maybe it turns out that H.G. Wells was much more right about the long form arc of history than not. We all become crabs. Okay, Josh, I gave a very, very, very broad overview of these chapters. What do you want to talk about?
I went through my notes and just because I realized I could star my notes in the Kindle app. So I wanted to. I found the ones that seemed like the most fun to revisit. Back in chapter 6, when he's delving into the Morlocks, he wishes, amongst the other things you said about having arms and tobacco and that sort of stuff. At one point, he also wishes that he had a Kodak, because he could have flashed a glimpse of the underworld in a second and examined it at leisure. I just find it interesting that he's just talking about having a camera, and kind of forgot that cameras existed in 1895, because I usually think that of more of a 20th century invention, even though it is clearly a 19th century invention. And it's also interesting to note that he refers to it as a Kodak, and it's kind of like Band-Aid or Jacuzzi and all those brand names that got debranded because that became generic.
100%. I was going to say, given the age group or band that we find ourselves in, I mean, man, do you remember growing up and having your parents or your grandparents take a picture with a disposable Kodak camera? Because that's a very vivid memory.
Oh, the disposable cameras. Yes, I very much remember those. I remember going to the supermarket, namely Price Chopper, so that Dad could, drop off a camera or pick up photos from like the last couple of weeks. And that was also the opportunity to go and because the photo center was also with the movie rental at the supermarket, so that would be my opportunity to go to pick out a movie.
Yes, there you
that
go.
we could rent.
Those were the days.
Yeah, that, and I specifically remember the layout. I think it was of the big Price Chopper where we lived, where it was like you enter.
So not the Ghetto Chopper.
Not the Ghetto Chopper, because I don't think the Ghetto Chopper had movie rentals.
Connor would know that, or Connor, ask your brother if they did.
But what I remember,
definitely know, yeah.
Because what I remember is, yeah. What I remember is going into the front entrance, and then all the way to the left in the front left corner of the store was this dark, like blacked out, like the walls were painted black, movie corner, where there would be a couple TVs playing trailers or a movie or something, and there'd be a guy on the counter who was also like working the disposable camera exchange, and then there were like a dozen racks of movies that you could go and browse. And I just, for some reason, that I don't know what to, like, that little section of the supermarket just stuck with me. That I went to that more than I ever went to like Blockbuster or Hollywood Movie or Hollywood Video.
Yeah, so, I never got movies from there. It would always be Hollywood Video. I mean Blockbuster or later on Hollywood Video.
Or just the fucking library.
Yeah, didn't really do that either.
I was definitely a Blockbuster guy myself as well, but the whole thing like germinating from the idea of a Kodak disposable camera, like that's all very real. Like, and I
whenever
remember,
disposable,
I remember like turning the little fucking click to take the fuck, like that's what Kodak makes me think of.
See, when I hear Kodak, I instantly think of the Polaroids for some reason, even though the Polaroid's a different company.
They're different things, but yeah, I mean, it's there's something so satisfying about that. And whenever I think about a disposable camera, I'm like, wow, we should bring those back. That was so cool.
They still exist.
I know, but then I'm like, but really, it's kind of better to. It's kind of better though.
It's sort of just a hipster novelty.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
like, there's nothing really that great about it. I
have seen some projects online of people taking lenses from old disposable cameras and just putting them on like a modern DSLR, and it's the lens that makes the photo. So yeah, it may not be an actual like film photograph, but it gets the same look just by having the plastic lens that the like fixed lens that these cameras were produced with, just as a lens that you could throw on your camera, your like more robust camera. So,
can I shift our discussion to something entirely different?
I mean, that's the nature of our podcast.
If this were Monty Python, it'd be like, and now for something entirely different. In my copy, chapter 6 is page 54. So the time traveler's talking about how Weena would put flowers into his pockets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we get this line afterwards. It says, the time traveler paused, put his hand into his pocket, and silently placed 2 withered flowers, not unlike very large white mallows, upon the little table. Then he resumed his narrative. There's 2 reasons I wanted to bring this up, and I'd like to posit them both and then hear what you have to think.
Okay.
One is, well, you know what? I say 2 reasons, and I'm not sure if I'm going to come up with 2 or if they're going to blend or bleed into each other.
Fair.
The thing is this. By having him present the flowers, is this evidence for the fact that the story that he's telling is true by presenting the flowers that he's discussing in the story? Or because, interestingly, the way that the story is presented to us, none literally 0% of the entire time travel narrative has ever been written about in a way in which it's like definitively occurred.
Verified.
Yes, what we're reading, this was a good reminder, I felt like, reading the story. What we are reading is an account of one person who was present at a retelling of a supposed experience from the time traveler.
It
And
is
here we
at
are.
best a secondary source.
Yes.
This could be another ghost
Which is
story.
how a lot of these
for all
stories are
we
written.
know.
Yes, exactly. What I want to go off is what Connor's saying. This could be another ghost story. When we finished the first 4 chapters, we talked a little bit about how, oh shit, this whole thing ends with the whole ghost story. We talked about the ghosts in this chapter already, so I'm not going to harp on it. But what I want to say is, it could be possible, and it's worth entertaining at this point in the narrative, that the entire time travel story is completely fucking bullshit. Still, it's complete and utter horse shit. And that the time traveler is some insane fucking prankster who goes to completely fucking irrational lengths in order to bamboozle his audience. And that by presenting 2 crumpled flowers in the middle of this story and then continuing on, could potentially be exactly the kind of evidence that you would want to present as a storyteller and be like, oh, this is what I'm talking about. And then you just keep going on without a hitch. And then just like fucking and for the record, I believe that the time travel is legitimate and true. As the reader,
but this is a work of fiction.
As the reader, I believe from the perspective of the storyteller, it's legit. But we kind of have some evidence for the storyteller to be a bit of a bullshitter already. And because none of the time travel so far has come from the first person account of the time traveler himself, this really raised the question for me to consider: is it that this person is just taking the bait, and the person who's writing down the story is hook, line, and sinker believing the same stupid dog shit as if this were a ghost story? And yet it's a time travel story presented secondhand. What do you think about that?
I think you're harping on the ghost story thing from the first 4 chapters a little too much. I think when that was presented in the story, it was to lend credibility to these new characters we had just been introduced to, why they would be doubting their host, and it's also meant to characterize him a bit more. Of yes, he's been known to pull pranks, but the point of the story is that he was telling something so fantastic that they had no choice to believe it, but to believe it. And I think this may just be an artifact of the way the story is written, or I'm sorry, the time period the story is written in, when it's written partially as a conversation, and everything's written as conversations and not a narrative. Yes, the time traveler is telling a narrative, but it's told kind of like a conversation he's having with the people in the room. And that the flowers being presented as just that break of like, hey, this is still a conversation, not just a retelling of or spinning a yarn. And yes, the flowers do constitute evidence of his travel, but it's I think you locked in on you both locked in on the ghost story thing, and have just been running with it maybe in a bit of the wrong direction. just due to the amount of time that's been here since the book was published.
I've got two things here that I want to say. One, in terms of ghost
And two.
stories, the first one, in terms of like ghost stories, this kind of is a ghost story, just from the perspective of the Eloise. He is a ghost to them, long dead from their past. Like
and the Eloise are ghosts to us just from the future. They're not
sure.
tangible to us. They're not real, so therefore they are ghosts.
So I just had that realization. That's interesting.
Yeah,
and
no,
then,
it is good.
Two, yeah. So like, I do think. I mean, I think the ghost story mention is in there for a reason, and I think it's reasonable to have doubts about the validity of the time traveler's journey.
Yes,
and to be fair, the proof we've seen is the mini time machine disappearing. That is the thing that did happen. Could that be a magician's trick? I guess so. I'm sure there's other tricks like that that are provable. Magicians can do whatever. And then the flowers. If the flowers are totally foreign, at this point in 1890 whatever, like, could a man of science procure some flowers from a foreign country, save them just for this trick that he knows that none of these guys would have ever seen before? I think he could have done that. I think that's a possibility. So I think there is an element of like, this could just be all him talking out of his ass a little bit, but you want to believe.
Yes, you do. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of you want to believe is kind of like the whole point of suspension of disbelief for a story. But I think what I was trying to say was that it's good you guys have this doubt, because I think that's part of the way the story is meant to be structured. It's that, oh man, the little bit of doubt in the truth of the story is meant to be a bit of intrigue from the time period that this story was written.
Yeah.
It's just like the style of the time. It's like, this is, I mean, the narrative, for the sake of the narrative, you have to believe that he's telling the truth in his story, just on the honor of the fact that he's a gentleman, effectively. But there is still some doubt, because it is a work of fiction, and you don't want to, present it as being absolutely true in case some rube off the street reads it and wonders why the king hasn't banned time travel. I don't know. So
no, you're right. And what I really want to end on, which is in agreement with both of you, is like, what I appreciate about how this is written is like, it leaves room open for both of those things. Like, what I think is most interesting about this, and we'll see how it ends, obviously, but at this point in the story, what I think is most interesting is that everything that we've read is in the framing of it being a conversation. And so like as we go through this literary discussion, and we're like, oh, well, the Eloi and time travel and 800,000 years into the future and the planet falling into the sun and cannibalism, everything we're going to talk about and everything we have talked about is wrapped up in this framing device of it being a discussion, or it being a story, rather.
yes,
that someone else is telling and is recorded, by the writer.
It's a secondary source.
Precisely. And that is just such an excellent framework with which to deliver this story, because just like Josh is saying, it creates this suspension of disbelief and the suspension of doubt, like in tandem, where for the reader, it's meant to sort of evoke this, like this state of uncertainty, where like they read it and they're like, could this, in 1895, could this really be an account of a gentleman who attended a dinner party of someone who achieved legitimate time travel? Could it be? You read it in 2025, you're like, you're fucking a literal fucking idiot if you think that's possible. But the framing device in 1895 is ingenious. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's meant to make you wonder, like, could this be possible?
Right. Because we kind of like took a couple jabs at this and thought it was, but we were like, oh, well, if we were having this podcast in 1895, would it be a dinner party? The answer is yes, it would be a dinner party. We wouldn't be having a podcast. We'd all be smoking cigars and having a discussion in the drawing room, amidst an open fire. It doesn't, this this whole like discussion of the story is like sort of beyond in some ways how I think we've been considering it, and I think what it gets a lot of credit for is sort of having the foresight to couch itself amidst both scientific fact and scientific uncertainty or doubt. Like I think H.G. Wells is kind of a genius for creating a story that is set so far into the future and like within this bizarre sort of threshold of likelihood and unlikelihood that like once you're reading it, whether you're reading it in 1895 or in 2025, like the reader is kind of like, well, I mean, it's so sort of divorced from any conception of reality, even between those two time periods, 1895 and now 2025. It feels like it's so separated from those things that like both of those readers from both time periods, if I'm not being too bold, I think are kind of forced into a state of questionhood where it's like, am I meant to take this as legitimate or fiction? Is that fair?
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And again, like the further you go from 1895, just like how we started this conversation, you're going to feel like you have more of a wealth of scientific knowledge to maybe poke holes in very specific things. But I think even beyond that, I think that H.G. Wells crafts a time travel story that is still meant to be beyond our current scientific understanding, as to say, even if you have 130 years of like intellectual progression from when I wrote this book, can you safely say that you're beyond my conception of the future? And I kind of think the answer is no. I think that is sort of like, right, it's supposed to be no. I agree. I think that's kind of like the bold achievement of like the first quote unquote time travel story, is that, Wells is saying like, you still haven't caught up to me. I wrote this in 1895, but whenever you're reading it, you're still not there. You see?
Yep. There's actually one of the highlights I did was the time traveler lamenting the fact that all the books he found in the library of the museum had turned to dust.
Yes.
And the thing that struck me was, with the keenest force, was the enormous waste of labor to which this somber wilderness of rotting paper testified. Just another great use of the English language there. So it is getting late. There are 3 notes I want to touch on really quick. A couple of them are
can I say
just language that I want to share? But yeah,
one quick thing off of what you just said, Josh.
Yeah, of course.
It's just very funny because in that line that you're talking about, because again, this story is written from someone else who's recounting the story of the time traveler, orally telling the story.
Mm-hmm.
The writer says, had I been a literary man, And I think recounting the words of the time traveler, had I been a literary man, like this would have been like a devastating blow. Like this would have been like, and so he's kind of presenting it as like, oh, well, the fact that all the books turned to dust doesn't really matter. But it's like so funny. We sort of have gone back and forth on, is the time traveler a stand-in for the author or not? I think this is kind of evidence for not being a stand-in, because the time traveler himself is saying, I'm not a literary man. But of course, the only way he's saying that is because the author, presumably a literary man, because he's writing a fucking book, by the way.
No, I think he's a mathematician.
Okay, but he's writing a book. The time machine is a book. He's writing it.
No, it's a movie.
He's a literary man. And it's just, there's kind of an irony in H.G. Wells writing, had I been a literary man, referring to a character who is not, but I think presumably understanding that he himself, the author, is. You see the discrepancy I wanted to touch on?
Yes.
That's all. That's all.
Yep.
That's all. Please go on.
All right. So 3 quick notes. Thought of the great processional cycle that the pole of the Earth describes. Page 65 of my copy, chapter 7. Only 40 times had that silent revolution occurred during all the years that I had traversed. And during these few revolutions, all the activity, all the traditions, the complex organizations, the nations, languages, literatures, aspirations, even the mere memory of man as I knew him, had been swept out of existence. And I wanted to highlight that because, it describes a cycle that I didn't know that they were really aware of back in the late 19th century, which is like the poles do like process. The North Star has not always been the North Star, and it will not always be the North Star.
I don't know if I'm going to sound crazy, but I think I touched on that in the last episode about the reversal of the poles somehow.
It's not the reversal of the pole. The magnetic poles do reverse every few years, but what he's referring to is the cycle of the Earth actually, its axis actually wobbles. Like right now it's like 23.5 degrees or something. It can vary by several degrees over the course of about 20,000 years, which is where that 40 number comes from.
Oh, so you're not talking about like south becoming north and vice versa.
Right, that's a magnetic pole thing, and that happens, I think, it's roughly the same time scale, actually.
That is what I was talking about, but okay.
Yeah, but it is a different phenomenon from the one that he's referring to with the pole like traversing the night sky,
Gotcha,
so to say.
Yeah.
But I really like the language about how like everything he has known is completely wiped away from the Earth, and there's not even a memory of the man that he used to know. Mankind.
Right.
And then page 67, towards the end of the chapter, and the intelligence that would have made this state of things a torment had gone. Why should I trouble myself? These Eloi were mere fatted cattle, which the ant-like Morlocks preserved and preyed upon, probably saw to the breeding of. And there was Weena dancing at my side. And I think that line probably gets to the heart of what we've been talking about this whole time, about the class differentiation and just how different these descendants of humanity are. One of them is, he literally describes as fatted cattle, and the other are, he refers to as insects. And but also as like effectively farmers who are tending to their stock. And funny enough, ants actually have been documented farming. There are ants that farm aphids and use their excrement as a source of sugar. They also farm fungi.
I do the same thing.
And gross. And other like ant-sized things, but they actually have livestock, or some colonies do.
Right.
And he's lamenting the fact that all the intelligence that could have seen what he's seeing had gone, so that they were just effectively animals from his point of view. And here was Weena just dancing, just being whatever Weena is. Not a care for this world order that he has horridly found himself in.
Yeah.
And
As a Final Fantasy fan might say, Yuna dances and people die.
I never played Final Fantasy, so
Yeah,
I'll just
absolutely.
This is strictly for the listeners. It's not for either of you. But
that one's for the Final Fantasy heads out there.
The Final Fantasy X fans specifically. But yeah, no. No, I'm right there with you, Josh. That's an important line, and the whole idea of like Morlocks as ants and Eloi as, I don't know, apes,
cattle,
right, or cattle, right, as cattle. I think that's really big. I'm still.
It also points back to that meat that he saw in the cave.
Right. Like, without wanting to be repetitive, I am questioning whether, like, is this presented at face value and the Eloi and the Morlocks are exactly as they seem to be? Or, like, are we still, with this last third of the story, are we still being set up for a rug pull? And it's like, oh, well, you thought that the Morlocks were fucking insects, but it turns out that they were much more complicated and advanced than you gave them credit for. I don't know. All I know is there's going to be a humongous crab within this story, and I'm excited.
I will say, Victorian era stories, in my limited experience with them, basically Wells and Vern's works, tend to be, they don't tend to break the mold that much, since they are creating the mold.
Right.
So maybe don't get your hopes up. I think morality does seem to be very black and white in these stories.
Well, there's also an element of them by creating the mold. They don't have a mold yet, so it's maybe sometimes it's easier to differ
stray
from stray from the template that we're used to.
That is true.
And the whole thing with the supposed cannibalism of the Morlocks eating the Eloi, which the time traveler is like, oh, I can't even consider it. Like, it's so disgusting. I can't even think about it. But that's the implication, that the Morlocks are taking the Eloi and dragging them down to their subterranean depths,
the pits of hell,
and consuming them.
Yeah.
Well,
very demonic imagery
there. Wells kind of has this passage. He says he thinks it may be a necessity. He's referring to, technically, if we're talking about two schisms of humanity, the Morlocks and the Eloi, he's technically referring to cannibalism as a necessity, but he thinks that it may be more sympathetic for the Eloi still, because he's able to, like, easier, right? Empathize. That's a great word. He can empathize with them. And one more thing I really, really want to mention is that the time traveler, he has this line on page 57. He says, Weena, I had resolved to bring with me to our own time. Well, this is part of the kind of interesting nature of the story being told as a conversation, because we know that when the time traveler comes back, he doesn't have Weena. We've already seen the time traveler come back into the dinner party. Right. And so, like, I think that we get this very intriguing sort of dynamic between like, oh, is the story being told true or not? And also, uh, we're being told the story in a present that that we are recounting as it's being told to us. And Weena, a character who's being discussed as the time traveler is discussing their past, and yet they're traveling to the future, is not with them. They have very obviously not taken Weena into the
He's lost his
quote
companion.
unquote. Exactly. They don't have the companion cube.
Could you?
Not what I said. Not
Could
what
you-
I said, but I love the reference.
Yes.
Could you imagine bringing Weena back to the 19th century?
No.
How terribly she would be treated.
Mm-hmm.
It would be so. Oh God, that would he would think, oh, I'm saving her from this life of mundanity and like sometimes stagnation, and then she would be treated like probably like a sideshow,
Exactly. A sideshow.
she'd be put into an exhibit or something. It would be horrific, probably.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that sort of comes back to the whole, oh, well, is this a legitimate story or is this a retelling of a story? And I think that this is like where it becomes much more interesting.
Yeah.
It's like regardless of the legitimacy, it brings into question, like, is Weena real? Is Weena a real person at all?
I mean, yeah, unless he was like, and now I'll bring her out at the very end of the book. Come on in, Weena.
Right.
And she was just hanging out in the time machine the entire time, waiting.
This is like Jimmy Fallon. They're like, and coming out, our special guest, Weena from the fucking,
Yeah, from the hit TV series
from the 31st century. I can't do math. I don't know.
871st century.
Thank you, John.
The one note I had for the entire thing, guys, is and I wanted to see if this was how it was in your books. So the word clue was spelled CLEW.
No,
I did not pick up on that.
Clues,
Where is
CLEW.
that? Where is
That's
that?
in my
Please tell
my
me.
copy of the book. He's saying, oh, the clues leading to like what happens to this civilization or whatever. It's spelled CLEWS for me.
Do you know what chapter that was, or you're just like
it was in there a couple of times. I forget if it was the last chapter or prior, but yeah.
Okay. I don't think I have that exact spelling.
Yeah, I've never seen it spelled like that before, so.
Well, what I will say, and then if Josh or Connor want to add on, please jump in. But earlier in these procession of chapters, the time traveler mentions this. He sees far off this like distant structure, and then
I was going to mention that, yeah.
Right, and then later he's like, "Oh, this like this green porcelain structure. This might be the key." He realizes this. Well, he goes to it. It turns out it seems to be a future museum, which is a kind of mind bending sort of sci-fi idea. We're talking about like sci-fi in 1895 again. I think this is an absolutely incredible detail to add into your science fiction story. He's Wells. He is writing this story where he is writing beyond a museum, post anything in his own world. You know, this does not have anything to do with London. This is such a forward-thinking science fiction detail to create such a a disconnected uh museum detail. Well, I don't know. I'm probably talking in circles, but like this whole section I think was really cool. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I appreciate how Wells is uh kind of like talking about in two different tenses of the future, because they're at once discussing the future in which the character of the time traveler is talking about to the audience, and yet they're also saying within the same breath uh how that future is uh uh how that future is like removed and separated from any conceivances of the future of the then contemporary age. And I think I brought this point up several times, so I don't want to harp on it, but I do think that Wells in this moment does a really awesome job of conceiving of a future beyond uh the quote unquote like regular future of his contemporaries. And I think it goes to show, I think reading The Time Machine in 2025, it kind of leads the reader to ask like, oh, what was the like general idea of the future in 1895? Just like how what is the general idea of the future in 2025? And I think it leads us to something like Futurama, humorously enough. Josh mentioned Futurama. I think that like our general cultural understanding of the exact present of now, the future understanding is sort of like Futurama.
Speaking of crabs,
exactly. Yeah, you're talking about fucking Zoidberg.
Zoidberg.
What
I
about
can't wait to meet.
Zoidberg?
I'm so excited to be hanging out with Zoidberg and Bender.
There you go. Well, what I want to wrap up with here is that I think Wells's great accomplishment is that he reaches like beyond the 1895 conception of Futurama. I think in 1895 there was an idea of Futurama already. There was a preconceived notion amongst the educated body of the end of the 19th century, in which there was a collective idea of what Futurama was. I think it existed.
H.G. Wells would have loved that show.
Precisely.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so I think what H.G. Wells posits and contributes with The Time Machine is a future beyond the then contemporary idea of the future. I think that is what is most fascinating of like The Time Machine.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's that's one of the great strengths so far of this book is yeah, it's not the stereotypical future, utopian or otherwise. That was one of the biggest surprises when he landed in the far future. How different it was than what I expected. And it's way more interesting.
Yeah,
coming at it like that. I gotta jump off, guys. But
Okay.
Any final thoughts?
I did have one last quick note of in the beginning of chapter 8, or somewhere in chapter 8, he refers to Weena as she always seemed to me, I fancy, more human than she was, perhaps because of her affection was so human. It's just another one of those. It reminded me of the tears thing earlier on, where the tears were the a part of the inheritance of humanity, and this seemed like the opposite of that.
Yes.
The other side of the coin. It's like she still has a very human like affection that he can't ignore as a human.
I wonder if we get any of those moments for the Morlocks.
Yes.
Who knows?
Down the road.
And, speaking of nose, he also fucking graffitied some South American statue or something when he was going through the museum.
Yes. There's a lot of little details like that. What I'll say for my last thing is that and sort of going off what Josh and Connor were saying, the whole idea of cannibalism, there's sort of this idea of like the time traveler's perception of what he saw underneath the depths. It's like, did the time traveler even witness any idea of cannibalism? Because the time traveler jumps to the idea of that they are consuming and eating a Eloi.
Yeah.
But every chapter there's like some sort of like, oh, I didn't realize this thing existed.
Exactly.
Or this thing was real, right?
I think the meat thing was different though, because he sees the meat. He clocks his meat when he's down there, and it's later as he's thinking about it again, he realizes that it looked familiar, and as he kept thinking about it, it coalesced in, oh, it was a part of a person, or at least yeah.
I mean, we will see when we
will.
I think
maybe we'll find out in the next episode to meet or not to meet.
That is the question.
That is the question. Folks, thank you for listening. Thanks for sticking with us. If you are interested and want to follow us on social media, we are at Chapter Chumps on Twitter and Blue Sky. Follow both, actually, two very different experiences for the follower. Fun time either way. You can go on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, give us a 5-star rating and a glowing review. Next episode we'll be talking about what? Chapters 9 through...
We'll be talking about the rest of the book. Yes.
Oh, shit. Fuck. God damn.
We are
this is going to be a fast one. This is a fast one.
Hell yeah.
And we're going to rate the book.
That's exciting. Okay, cool.
We should start earlier next week because it's going to be a long one.
Our excitement. Well, no promises. But as always, folks, until next time.
All we know.
It's suck my fucking dick.
Okay, we all know the Morlocks are Meg.
Oh wait, we're gonna do Family Guy right now?
Wait, no.
No, we're not now.
Bite my metal ass. Is that what he says?
Bite my shiny metal ass.
Bite my shiny metal ass.
There's already been an episode where Bender multiplied. Like, they've done nano benders. They've already done that.
Wow.
Yeah, no, they
makes you think.
It really does. Also, you can suck. And I don't mean to use the technical term, but my nits.
Holy, wow!
All right, stopping the recording.
Knucking fun.
Good fun.
I'll see you next time, buddy.